This is the ultimate guide to unlimited n8n automations through self-hosting. In this tutorial, I'm going to cover the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to deploy n8n reliably. I'm also going to cover some of the vital things most tutorials seem to miss, and I see they're not covering them. I'll give you the full pros and cons of self-hosting to help you figure out if it's right for you, and then I'll walk you through the process. If you aren't already subscribed, click the button below to see all my new content as it drops each week. And if you want even more value, then join our free school community with the link in the description, with all the templates, guides, and tutorials all in one place, as well as a vibrant community of AI entrepreneurs helping each other out. So before we jump into the actual tutorial, what I want to cover is the different layers of complexity and power that we can go over here. So first of all, very obviously, we've got manual. Okay, this is the least complex and the least powerful of any of our automation processes. So for example, in an email, you could just manually reply to your email. Doesn't require any more automation, doesn't require any additional software, just the email itself, and you can do that. Right? So it's not complex, and nor is it particularly powerful because you're not leveraging any of the technology. At the next level, we've got basic automation. So think of this as perhaps setting some rules in your email filters, or you're using a kind of a really basic AI automation, or you're using something like a Zapier or an if this, then that. Something really, really simple, just does a very simple process, one in, one out kind of thing. Whilst this is really basic, it does take some additional understanding of the software to use, and it does come with a slight increase in complexity, but it does allow that automation and that power so that you don't have to repetitively do every single task. At the next level, I would say make.com comes here. And really make is actually a very broad spectrum. So although I've put it kind of in this point in the spectrum, I would say that make kind of covers from very simple through to really pretty complex, but not really complex. And so make's a really good option if you're just getting started and you just want to understand. And then we've got n8n Cloud. n8n Cloud is the n8n software that if you go to the n8n website, that's what you can use. You can deploy it. For there, you can start off for free and then you pay a subscription somewhere between about £25 if you're paying pounds up to 120 for the larger version, and then obviously onto the enterprise software costs. And that's pretty good, but it does come with a lot of limitations, which we're going to cover in a minute. And it's slightly more complicated than make, but not a huge amount more complicated. But it does offer a lot of extra horsepower with doing that. And then the final option, which we're going to cover today, is the n8n self-hosted. Now, this really is the most powerful. It's right at the top here, and it is the most complex to set up in terms of complexity. It's at the top too. But I would say that these two scales of complexity and power aren't equal insofar as, although it is the most complex, it really isn't very complex, and it's not much more difficult once you've got it set up to use than n8n Cloud, and n8n Cloud isn't much more difficult than Make. And I really would say that the jump from here to here is very small in terms of complexity, but in terms of power is huge. Now, the obvious question that you should be asking yourself is, well, what's the benefits and what are the drawbacks to using n8n Cloud or n8n self-hosted? And I've kind of put this table together here so you can stop and you can review it and come back to it another time. But I'll talk through the processes now, but I'll talk through the different pros and cons now, and I'll explain why I think the benefits and drawbacks of each of them, and why I do think that n8n self-hosted really isn't that difficult and really is worth doing. So first of all, we'll talk about the startup process. Now, n8n Cloud obviously is pretty much instant. You just have to log in and it's already there for you. They've deployed it, it's all ready to go, very easy. And n8n self does need some setup, but by the end of this video, you'll be able to do that. So it's not really a problem, but yes, it is a little bit of extra work to start. n8n Cloud has support default by built in. So if you're someone who really needs a lot of handholding, a lot of supporting, you don't really want to go Googling on the forums, you don't want to be searching or using AI to support you on creating new flows, then again, the cloud solution could be the right one for you. Versus n8n self-hosted, where you don't really get any support unless you go for the enterprise model, which we'll talk about in a moment. When it comes to the shared product, one of the big advantages though in n8n cloud deployment are the shared projects. Now, unless you go again for the enterprise model, then you don't get any ability to share projects. And in the cheapest subscription model for the cloud, you get one, and in the larger one, you get three. And I think you can obviously go and scale as much as you want when you get to enterprise. With the self-hosted, you don't get any ability to use the shared to start with. But if you purchase the enterprise model, then you get unlimited projects. So, it's quite a big jump. They are the three main reasons why cloud is a winner. So you can see here I've put on the winning table that cloud does win on those 3 points. However, that's pretty much where the cloud solution falls over for me, and everything else is better on the self-hosted. Because in terms of the number of tasks you can do, if you run your own server and you self-host, you can do as many tasks as you want, as many as a server will physically allow you to push through. And realistically, you're going to get a lot more power from your own server than you would do from n8n's hosted version. Possibly the most powerful thing though is the ability to execute commands and run scripts and have additional apps within your n8n host. So for example, some of you may be familiar with ffmpeg. I'm going to be doing a video. The next video I'm doing is about how to deploy n8n with ffmpeg installed, which is extremely powerful for being able to manipulate media files. And it's so incredibly powerful that it allows you to manipulate all these media files, do whatever you want with them, concatenate them, add them together, shorten them, remove the audio from files. It's so powerful, but n8n does not include it by default, but you can add it in. That's just one example. There are a huge amount of scripts, huge amount of different apps that you can add in. Basically, if it's available in Linux, you can add it in. Another thing is no local file storage. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword because you don't really need local file storage in n8n cloud. You can absolutely get around that by using something like Google Drive or Dropbox or any of these other cloud platforms. However, it's really helpful for speed if you can get hold of a file, keep it locally, even just temporarily, manipulate the file however you need to, and then be able to send the final file back to a file storage system. And in the interim period, keep that file locally, and then once you finish with that file, you can then delete it so you're not clogging up your storage permanently. With the self-hosted option, that is totally available, and that can be really powerful. And you could even use storage on your own server instead of Dropbox, instead of Google Files. So you can add as much storage as you want. Obviously, there's a cost implication, but it's still arguably cheaper than using some things like Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox. The next option is the actual power of the processor and the RAM, and so the memory that you've got available to you. When you're using n8n cloud, you don't really have an option. You just get what n8n give you. Again, when you're on self-hosted, you choose. And yes, again, there's an implied cost. The more computing power you need, the more you're going to pay. And so I would absolutely say when you get started, and we're going to deploy a very cheap version here, but if you need to scale and if you need more power because some of the automations that you're doing and you want to do them locally and you need more power, you've got the ability to do that at your fingertips. Next is the number of workflows. So think of this as the number of scenarios, or again, if we're in n8n, then the number of workflows that we can run at any one time. We can only have 5 on the cheapest plan of n8n, up to 50 on the most expensive, unless you go for enterprise. Whereas with your self-hosted, you can have unlimited workflows active, and you can have unlimited workflows running at the same time. Again, n8n doesn't just limit you to the number you can have turned on, but it also limits you to the number that can actually run side by side. So if, for example, you've got a number of different clients, let's say you've got 20 clients. Those 20 clients have got 3 different scripts. Suddenly you could have the potential where those 3 things could be running all at the same time for all of your clients. If it's a really common script and it's used day in, day out by all of the clients, then suddenly you could get to a point where even on the biggest non-enterprise plan on the cloud process, 10 of those may have to hang, stall, or may not even process at all, which really isn't what you want. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for here as AI automation experts is to be able to service other people, but we need to make sure we can do that, and we can do that without any issues. So again, self-hosted for me is a complete no-brainer. And then finally on the price. What I would say here is that the setup we're going to do today is probably coming in around the £30 mark. So it's about, $40 or something like that. Not a huge amount of cost. I recognize for those of you who are just getting started, who are absolutely trying to bootstrap your business, you may be looking for the cheaper options. And I will talk about how you can do this completely for free, but why I wouldn't. But n8n Cloud, you're looking at minimum 24, up to £120 a month, including VAT. And it doesn't really make sense when you think about all the limitations you've got, even to hit that bigger price point. And again, I haven't compared this to make.com, but compared to make.com, again, it's slightly different because the way in which make prices. But for me, n8n self-hosted is unlimited. So for £30, $40 a month, all in, unlimited, it really doesn't make sense to go for anything else. Finally, one of the things I will cover off here is the fact that enterprise does exist for the self-hosted option, and you can have shared projects, global variables, teams, and then admin roles if you pay for the enterprise for self-hosted. I think this is a worthwhile investment once you get to the right stage in your business. It is $400 a month for a startup plan. You get a minimum of 1 year of the startup plan from when you start, if you are eligible. And I think you have to have like less than 25 members of staff and a certain turnover or something like that. A minimum of 1 year from when you get on the plan, up to unlimited if you never grow beyond the requirements. So you can stay on that plan forever if n8n recognize that you haven't grown to that size. Although realistically speaking, I think it doubles in price once you get to beyond the startup plan. So even at $800 a month, that seems like quite a lot of money to if you're just getting started. But the reality is that that's very reasonable price if you're adding in, say, maybe another £100 or so, which is maybe $130 a month. So you're looking at sort of under $1,000 a month for your entire enterprise level of software, which is pretty good when you get to that size. Before we get on to actually making and going through step by step the process, what I want to do is break down the process that we're going to do in a moment. And I want to make it as simple as possible for you to understand, because this is not a difficult thing to understand, but it seems complex when you try and read through the documentation. And if you've never done anything like this before, it's probably going to completely confuse you. And I want you to say, it's really not difficult. It's very simple once you can understand the process and what's going on. And here I'm going to talk it through now. So what you can see here is we've got the n8n code. Okay, now this is hosted on GitHub. We don't need GitHub today, but you've probably heard of GitHub. It's like a repository for lots of different code, and it's fairly open source, which is fantastic. It means that we can deploy it, we can use it, but so can n8n. So if you've used n8n already and you're using the cloud version, what you will see is that n8n will deploy their code from here, and they will deploy it themselves into their own cloud service. And from there, as we can follow this down to the green down here, it will then allow n8n cloud service to access webhooks, APIs, services, and service directly. And you don't need to get involved with deployment or anything else. However, today what we're going to do is we're going to take that code and we're going to turn it into a Docker image. Now, one thing I will say is that you can also add within the n8n code some custom scripts. Now, we're not going to do that in this tutorial because we're keeping it basic, but I just want you to understand that we can add custom scripts in, and we will do that in the next tutorial. But for now, I just want to explain to you that it's an option and it's really powerful, but we're not going to do that today. So we'll take the n8n code and we're going to add it into what's called a Docker image. Now, think of a Docker image a little bit like a virtual CD or a virtual hard drive. It's basically something that you can plug in to another computer virtually, and it will run an instance. It will run the whole computer system. So we'll take the n8n code, we'll put it into a Docker image. And in fact, actually in this tutorial, we don't even need to do any of the putting into the Docker image because n8n have already done that for us. All we need to do is point our render server to the Docker image and say, this is the computer system we want to use. And render will do all the hard work for us. So coming down to render itself now. Now render, think of render as a virtual server. Okay, so what do I mean by virtual server? If you're not sure about that, think of it as a virtual computer. Okay, it's really nothing more complicated than that. Think of an old school computer sitting on a desk. That is essentially what render offers, but you don't have to physically have the computer sat in your office or at home. What you can then do is you can then take the Docker image, which is essentially like the operating system. So it could be Mac, it could be Windows, it could be Linux. In this case, it is a Linux distribution, and it's already preloaded with the n8n application on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the render hard drive, or rather the render computer, and we're going to add the Docker image. And once we've done that, all we need to do is deploy render, a live running version of n8n inside our render server, and it can then make the calls to all of the different services that we have seen in n8n. However, this is a really, really important point, and I don't see enough people talking about this before they teach you how to go ahead and set up your n8n self-hosted process. The other option, which we're not going to cover today in the tutorial, but is the option to have a PostgreSQL database also attached to your render service. Now, I don't want to go into the details of this because it's for another video. I just want to point out that when you run your own service, you can optionally attach a PostgreSQL database. What does that do? What does that even mean? That basically is a database which will then allow you to hold all that information I just described, but it will hold it in a kind of a side account. So it's not on your main hard disk. It's kind of on a different database. Why would you want to do that? The answer is because you get increased redundancy. So if, for example, your deployment of n8n fails, you've got better redundancy with a PostgreSQL server, which means things like your workflows, your history, your logs, all of that good stuff that it really becomes business critical once you get to a certain size. Anything happens to your n8n deployment, you can immediately swap to a new deployment and you can attach it to the PostgreSQL database and you can immediately be up and running and straight away you go in again. So it's really, really important to understand that. When you get to a certain size, this is absolutely vital and I'm going to cover it in another video, but for now, we're not going to cover that. We're just going to jump straight in and get into the tutorial itself. So here we go. First thing we're going to do is we're going to come here to render.com, render.com, and we're going to sign up for an account. You can see here there's a free get started button and just click on that and sign in. Once you've signed in, on the top right hand side, you will see there is a add new button up here and we want to click this and we want to come down and we want to choose the web service. So we click on web service. And you can see here that there are already a lot of powerful providers. So you can add from GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. If you use any of those, that's fine. You can deploy n8n from GitHub, but for this tutorial, we're going to keep it really simple and not do that. We're going to instead come into existing image. And this is where you can just add the image. If you haven't got this tutorial to hand for whatever reason and you want to add the Docker image, you literally just need to search for n8n Docker and it is the very first link. So you can click it here. Scroll down, and in the start the n8n Docker, you can see just down here, the very last line of code is the actual Docker URL. We just need to copy this. We want to then paste that into the image URL here. You can see it's thinking about it. We don't need any credentials, and so we can come along and click the connect button. We can then give it a name. Call it whatever you want to just get you started. I'd perhaps go for demo just to show it's a trial and you're testing it out and seeing if it works. You can add it to a project. We don't need to do that for this example. Region, we'll go Oregon, US West is absolutely fine. And here we go. So now you've got a number of different instant types. So I want to talk through what this means. So 512 megs of RAM and 0.1 CPU is actually fine for the n8n just to get started. So I definitely do this just to start and test it out. However, if you're at a point where you know you're going to use n8n and you want to actually host properly, do not use this. Why? You need to use the starter or above model because without the starter model, you cannot access persistent storage and you also don't have the guarantee of zero downtime. And they are both really important if you're actually getting clients to pay you for the services that you provide. I actually pay for the slightly higher one, which is the standard one, because it has 2 gigs of RAM and a whole CPU to itself. And the reason I need that is because some of the video stuff that I do actually does require that. And I am actually tempted even to step it up to the Pro, but at the moment I haven't needed to because it is quite a jump in price, but it does obviously give you the opportunity. And you can step these up. So if you do decide you start on the starter and you decide it's not enough, you can absolutely swap onto standard or increase up, and that's not a problem at all. What I would say is it's much easier to step up than it is to come down. So I wouldn't start on something like the Pro Ultra and then decide actually you only need the starter. Start on the starter, see how you get on, and you should probably be fine for most of the beginner projects that you're setting up. Environment variables. Now we will come back to this in a moment. For now, we just want to deploy this web service and we won't do it as a free one because I want to show you some of the important things that we want to add in as environment variables. But first and foremost, we do just want to deploy the web service by clicking this button here to check that it can work. So go ahead and click the button. And what you can now see on the left-hand side, we've got events, settings, logs, metrics. So events is kind of like a overarching logs really, and you can essentially see this is like a console window here where we've got what's happening. So the service is starting, and at the moment it's kind of like the oldest process happens at the bottom and then the most recent is at the top. You can change that by clicking this arrow button here to swap it the other way around if you prefer, but it doesn't really matter either way. And now you can see that it says here editor is now accessible via, and it's localhost 5678. Now actually it's not, it's accessible via this link up here. So what we'll do is we'll click on this link here. What we now see is a 502 bad gateway. What I would say is if this happens, just give it a moment, wait and be a little bit more patient, because what you will find is if you come back and you click this link again, we get to the startup page, which is exactly what we want. Now, you do have to go through this process. One thing I have realized is that you need to keep this password very, very safe, because if you lose this password, there is no way to recover this account. This is obviously a self-hosted account. There is no backup, there's no other access, there's no other way to get into this account or to get the data back. So don't lose that password. Make it something quite simple, save it. Nobody else can access this account unless they know your URL up here, and we will use this URL in a moment to set it up and to make it secure. But for now, what I would say is email, password, get started, have a play, and just check that it all works. It should be exactly the same, except with some slight limitations, as I mentioned in the introduction. You can't do projects, you haven't got teams, and you haven't got the ability to create admins. So now we've got a successful deployment running. What we next want to do is add all the variables and add all of the things that make n8n so powerful, including a disk for the persistent storage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the left hand side and we're going to click on the disks button and we're going to choose add disk. As you can see here, it's 25 cents per gigabyte per month for storage costs. So realistically, we're not going to need more than a gigabyte to get started. So we're looking at 25 cents for the disk. So we'll click here, add disk. And then for the mount path, what we're going to use is over here in my document, which is available if you join the school community in the Discord. This document here, as well as any other templates for all the other videos we've got, are all available. They're all free in the community. So we're going to use this variable here. So the opt.render.n8n. So we'll select it, copy, or if you haven't got access to this template, you can just do it yourself. So it's there on the screen now for you. Go back to our dashboard, paste it in here. Size, we're just going to choose 1 gigabyte because that's absolutely fine. And then we're going to go ahead and add the disk. And that's all we need to do to add the disk. The next thing we're going to do is come over here on the left hand side to environment. We're going to click through here. You can choose add, and then you can choose from.env. Now we're going to choose from.env because the file I've got in the Notion template gives you all the information you need. So you can come back to the Notion template and you can select all the text, ignoring the first line, copy it, come back into the n8n screen, paste it in here. And then what we're going to do is we do need to do a bit of tweaking. So for example, we need to change the custom URL section, here again, and finally the custom URL section at the very bottom. And we also need to add in an encryption key, but we'll do that in a moment. So first we'll just go ahead and click add variables. And now you can see that we've got all of the different information here. For this custom URL, all we need to take is in fact, what we can just do is click straight copy here, and we can paste that in here. Same for the bottom one, we can paste that there. And for the third one, we can paste it, but then we need to remove the HTTPS. To delete that. For the encryption key, we'll just delete it. And then what you should see here on the right-hand side is we've got a generate button. So we can choose generate. Now you do want to keep this safe, so keep it somewhere. And all we're going to do then is come down here and click save and deploy. Now, that's worked and it's deploying in the background. Whilst that's deploying in the background, I just want to cover off what each of the different parts are. So first of all, n8n editor-based URL, n8n host, and most importantly, webhook URL. So as you saw already, although it's now hidden, we can click here on the eye to see them again, or just click onto the thing, onto the actual text, and it will show them. These are all really important because it confirms to n8n and into the internal system what our actual website is that we're accessing this n8n instance from. Now, we've got here n8n-demo-piof.onrender.com. If you're using a different service, it could be a different website, and you can even do self-hosting, and you can even have custom domain. So if you've got your own website, you can actually access it from your own custom domain if you want to. The encryption URL we've already covered. That's to ensure that your data is safe. The port is always going to be 443, which you can see there. And the protocol is always going to be HTTPS, which is easy enough. And then the n8n user folder is always going to be opt/render/.n8n, ensuring you add in the dot before the n8n. Now, the webhook URL is particularly important because if you don't have the webhook URL, you will not be able to access your n8n instance from other webhooks, so that it won't be able to communicate, which is obviously the whole point of n8n, is being able to communicate with other apps. So that is an absolute vital. Once you've added all those in, as I said, you click deploy. We've deployed. So if we go back into our events on the left hand side now, you will see it now says deploy live. It's green tick. We go into the logs. Again, we can see the service is live. If we click on here, we can see the website is up here and we've got /setup. So let's just go in and put some details in. We can go ahead and fill out this form and then we can choose get started. It then gives you an option that you can get some time limited offers where you can get workflow history for the last 24 hours, advanced debugging and execution search and tagging included within the free forever service, as long as you put your email in here and choose send me a free license key. I've already done that. So in today, I'm going to press skip, but obviously if you want it, you can press it here. And we are now in our n8n self-hosted instance. What you will notice up here, if you come to the plus button, is you will see that project is not available unless you have the enterprise plan. And you will also see that variables down here, again, is not available unless you're on the enterprise plan. However, we do have the ability to start from scratch or to test a ready to go AI agent. If we start from scratch, we'll get the screen that we're very much used to. We can add our first step. We can choose to create a chatbot, close out the window, build an advanced AI agent, use the AI agent. We can add a prompt for a system message. If you're a helpful haiku creator, we can press test step. You'll see it won't work because we need to add in the model and the memory and the tools. So we'll go and add a model. We will choose OpenAI. We then need to select credential. We then need to choose create new credential. We then need to paste our API key from OpenAPI. If you go to platform.openai.com and then up here on the right hand side, go to the settings cog, API keys, create new secret key, create your key, give it a name, and then create secret key. Come back to your n8n screen and paste in the API key here. Click save. It's gone green, which is good. Close that down, click out of that. Choose memory, choose the window buffer memory, close that out, and we can now run a test. I've chosen, I said the word test, and it's given us a haiku, and we can then check all the information here on the right hand side. We've renamed it, it's automatically saved. We can then choose to make it active, and we can come back here to the overview, click here, and you can see it's now saved. What's really important though is that we can close out by signing out, and indeed we can then sign back in again. So if I choose sign out and now use a new window and we ask for the same website again, this time we go and add the email and password we've already used before. Once we've logged in, we can then see we've still got the haiku writer information here. And if we click through, not only have we got the saved log with the saved credentials, so if we go into here, we can look in these in here that we've got the system message that's saved. We can also check in OpenAI, and indeed the OpenAI account, the credentials are saved there. We can then check through on the left-hand side back to overview into credentials. That's the OpenAI account that we created 2 minutes ago. And we can also go up to executions and we can see we've had a successful one and a failed one at the beginning. So now we've got persistence. The final thing to check is whether or not we can access our webhooks. So let's go back and do that now. So instead of when chat message received, we'll take this away and we'll add a webhook call, link it to the agent. We shall take the test URL. Now for this example, I've just gone into Postman and I'm just creating a post HTTP request. I'm going to paste the webhook -test so that we can test this variable. I'll go back to n8n. I'll click into webhook. I'll choose listen for test events either here or up here. Now it's listening and it's listening on the webhook -test. So we'll go back into Postman. and we'll choose send. And you can see this webhook is not registered for post requests. Did you mean to get? Let's swap it to get. And let's send again. And we got workflow started. And indeed, we got some information out here. And if we go into the schema, we can then see these are all the headers that were received, the URL that was used, and indeed we don't have any further information. What we could do, pass various information in raw, and we could write a JSON, which would give information, and we could choose listen for test event. Come back here, press send. From our webhook body, the key, drop it in here, and then we can test the step. However, we now don't have the session ID, so we now need to come back into here again, choose test again, into the window buffer memory, and this time we need the session ID. So instead of session ID, we will define it below, and we will use Postman token. And run the agent again. So without those environment variables that we added in at the end, you would not be able to do that. It wouldn't work, and it's really, really important to explain that. Also, without adding the environment variables, without using the paid plan, so just to go back for a moment, up here the n8n demo, and here we've deployed it 14 minutes ago, 3 dots, we can see here into settings. So it's really important that we go for that starter plan that allows us to have a hard disk attached to it over here on the left hand side. Remember, we just chose the 1 gig and we added the mount path of opt render n8n. We added the environment variables, which ensured that we had the webhooks that worked, and we encrypted the disk, and we put the correct information in for the ports and protocol and base URL. And that now allows us to ensure that each time we save, we log out, it will continue to work. Whether we're logged in or not, it will allow our information to continue to run. And once we have our webhook turned on as active, which it is now here, if we come back into the webhook, instead of the test URL, we can choose production URL, copy that. And again, if we come into our Postman demo, paste in the non-test webhook and choose send again. Because the active status was set to on, we've just had a whole process run, and it's all gone green. And indeed, we can go into executions and we can see that. And we've had an error, but that's fine. And we can come in here and see that the whole process has indeed worked, and we've now had another output, which is great.